Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you're having a good day today so far. Hope you had a good week. Um, so, when I uploaded on Friday, I mentioned at the end of the episode that as I was recording it, that my nephew had gone to the hospital and I can't remember if I ended up telling that they found out he had acute appendicitis, and they transferred him to a hospital downtown, and they removed his appendix on Thursday morning. And he came home that night, and he's fine. Everything's good. Uh, obviously, he's in a little bit of pain. He's got some bruising on the incisions, which I don't know. I had my gallbladder out, which is a very similar type of surgery to it's laparoscopic, make little incisions here and there to do the surgery, and they pull the organ through the belly button area. But I don't remember bruising like that on my incisions. I mean, it's perfectly normal. And as easily as I bruise, I didn't bruise like that. And I don't know if it's because an appendix is bigger than a gallbladder. Um, even somebody else I talked to that had their gallbladder removed said that they didn't have bruising like that. Not to say, like I said, that it's not normal. It's just I don't remember that. And I don't know. He looks like it. It looks like it hurts. The bruises look very painful. But for someone who's really never had a lot of injuries and never been in a lot of pain over anything, he's handling it very well. So we just got to make sure, that it doesn't get infected or the incisions don't come open or anything like that. But I think he's going to be fine, and I think he's going to feel a lot better. Um, but I've just been taking care of him, and um, I had to make him dinner last night so he could take his antibiotic, and he would have gotten up and done it, but he was hurting, and he came outside to get me to ask me to help him, and right before that, there was a grasshopper that it was so huge, and it was big enough that you could like actually see the details of the grasshopper because that's how big it was. Had these long, lanky black legs, this yellow stripe down its back, and it actually didn't hop at me. It flew at me and it hit me. And I mean, I hate grasshoppers, and I totally lost it. And I don't know where it went. I couldn't see it, and I was so afraid to open the front door that it might jump inside and get in the house. And I'm just like looking around for it. I hate grasshoppers. They're absolutely disgusting. They're creepy. Um, ugh. Anyway, so let's how eventful my night was last night. Okay, I have a lot of stuff that I want to get to today. I have an op-ed that I want to read that Candace Owens wrote because I really love her writing. I just like Candace Owens in general, and I haven't really done a lot of anything that she's written in a while. So I want to take a look at something that she wrote, and then we're going to talk about Matt Gaetz, and we're going to talk about Jack Dorsey, inflation, and I think it's going to be interesting. And also, I can go back on YouTube, so I'm no longer shut down from YouTube. Um, I was banned from Twitter for 7 hours the other day. First time I've ever been banned on Twitter for a comment that I made. They said it was hate speech. It wasn't, but they said it was. So I had to delete that tweet if I wanted to be able to get back on my account after 7 hours. So I'm going to try to be very careful about what I talk about when I'm putting it up on YouTube. I know I said I didn't want to play that game, but if I do intend to do whatever I can to get this podcast off the ground, I have to be more careful so I don't end up losing my YouTube channel. One more strike while I have two active strikes against me, and I will lose the channel. So I have to be very careful about what I say. Anyway, let's get into it. Today's daily promise is to the chief musician for the sons of Korah, a song upon Alamoth. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Psalm 46, 1 through 2. So strong is our victorious Lord that evermore can we, his people, trust in his promise to protect us. Fear not, O believer, for even now is the kingdom of God visible by your faith. Take up your heavenly reign. Rejoice in your seat at the Father's throne. God will be your sturdy defense, and never will the enemy's darts pierce your hide. So go forth, proclaiming the Lord's victory in boldness. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about, because it's a very short story, is Matt Gaetz and what happened to him. This is from the beltwayreport.com, written by Stephen Ale. So it says a man living in Portland threatened the life of Republican Representative Matt Gaetz. The man then travels from Portland to Washington, D.C. The Washington Capitol Police recommended that the man be arrested and prosecuted, but the DOJ, headed by the corrupt Merrick Garland, refused. The man obviously intends to make good on his threat, and the DOJ stands by and allows him to move about freely. Let's compare to a man who threatened the lives of Democrats. A 71-year-old Pennsylvania man who was stopped while driving to D.C. They didn't even wait for the man to get to Washington. He was arrested and held without bail. He is facing 10 years in prison. This is not a one-off. A lefty nut job threatened to kill Representative Andy Harris of, is that Maryland, I think, and his family. They did arrest him and charged him. He was convicted. What do you suppose his sentence was? He got 8 weekends in jail. 8 days. Compare that to 10 years for a suspected assassin threatening Democrats. But at least they arrested that guy. So this is what Gaetz said. He said, I thank the gentleman for yielding because I think someone may be trying to kill me, and if they are successful, I would like my constituents and my family to know who stopped their arrest. And on the eve of the Attorney General testifying before the Judiciary Committee tomorrow, it is just yet another example of the Department of Justice having a double standard. If my name weren't Gaetz, if it were Omar or Tlaib, you bet this person would have been arrested because that's what the Capitol Police recommended. But the Department of Justice doesn't seem to care so much when it's Republicans. Gaetz then read the threat that the man sent him and said, Looky here, pal. I live in Portland. Portland has ordered a hit on you. I accepted the contract. Have a good day. If he wasn't serious, he would not travel 3,000 miles. In January 2021, a Wyoming man left a phone message for Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming, threatening Matt Gaetz's life before Gaetz was due to make a speech in Liz Cheney's home state to speak out against her for voting to impeach then President Trump. Christopher uh, Podlesnik, 51, left several messages threatening to kill then Rep. Cynthia Loomis of Wyoming, Senator Barrasso, Representative Gaetz, and Wyoming State Senator Anthony Bouchard, who is running to unseat Rep. Liz Cheney. Quote, I will, and then the word is censored, so I don't know what it says, see that Matt Gaetz gets killed when he gets here, was one message allegedly left by Pod, Pod, oh, Podelsnik. That's spelt differently than it is at the top. You let Gaetz step into the state of Wyoming. Not only is he going to be dead, you're going to be dead, was another message left for Barrasso, allegedly by Podlesnik. Podlesnik was actually arrested. If convicted, what will his sentence be? As we've seen, threatening a Republican politician's life doesn't mean always result in a stiff sentence. So that's what's going on with Matt Gaetz. I I don't understand why they aren't taking it more seriously because the political realm is so heated right now and people are very crazy and they're very dogmatic about their beliefs and some people are so crazy that yeah they absolutely would kill somebody for their beliefs. I mean, look at the rioting that went on for, you know, that well that still goes on, but over the summer of 2020 for sure. It was I mean, some of it was just because they could get away with it, but there were some people out there who were doing it because they held firm their beliefs of that they were oppressed and that they had to do this to make change. So people are that crazy, and they should be. I don't know. I feel like, you can't threaten people. That's illegal. So the fact that he didn't do anything is not the problem. It's the fact that he even threatened, and that they're not even, yet we still have people from January 6th in prison or in jail without bail, you know, being treated horribly. But a man actually threatens a public figure and nothing happens to him. Of course, that's the way it would be. But Matt Gaetz is right. If this were Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, AOC, this man would have been arrested before he even made it to DC. I think he probably would have been arrested in Portland at his home. All right. So it's a very short story. There's not really much else to say on that. We don't really have any more information that I could find. So the next story, real quick, before we get into all the other stuff, this was a breaking story, um, and this was from Montana Daily Gazette, and it's from October 21st, written by Reagan Hall. So a refugee from Afghanistan has been arrested for the I can't say the word because then YouTube will delete my video. So for the sexual assault of an 18-year-old girl in a Missoula, Montana hotel. And I think you know what I mean. The R word, which I can't say on YouTube, apparently. Um, Zabahullah Mohammed, I guess, 19, was charged with sexual intercourse without consent on Tuesday, October 19th, and is being held on a $50,000 bond. Mumand was granted parole status just a few months prior and was resettled into Montana by the U.S. State Department. Governor Greg is how do you say that? Giantfort, I guess, addressed President Biden requesting he cease resettling Afghan refugees in Montana. And then Adam Shaw of New York tweeted out about this happening. And then continuing on, it says Governor Giantfort said, "We support providing a home for our Afghan allies that have been fully vetted. We had a tragic situation with alleged sexual assault yesterday with someone who arrived here in the state earlier this month. I called on the Biden admin. This individual did not have an SIV status, and I called on the Biden admin to assure us that these refugees are fully vetted. It's not clear to us that that occurred in this situation. So we're asking the Biden admin to halt the placement of refugees here until they can assure us that the people that are being placed, our allies being placed here, are fully vetted." Senator Steve Daines spoke on the issue, saying, "The fallout and consequences from President Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan continue. While I support assisting our fully vetted Afghan allies who served alongside our armed forces, President Biden has failed to provide answers as to who has come into the country or if they have been fully vetted according to what's required by law." Um, Representative Matt Rosendale criticized President Biden for sending Afghan nationals to Montana back in September. Rosendale was met with gross misrepresentations by the mainstream media, yet his concerns about the vetting process are now very real. Mumand is one of the 20 Afghan nationals resettled in Montana. In just a few short months, at least one young Montanan has been sexually assaulted by the refugees President Biden has shipped to Montana. Ganfort has told critics that Afghan refugees have been vetted. The Montana Gazette has seen text messages from legislators imploring him to deny them entry and take the side of Rep. Rosendale. After asking, "Governor, do you really believe the Biden administration?" the representative never got a response. MDG has reached out to Rosendale for comment. And so the girl, I don't know her name, she was 18. She met him, and I think they were supposed to go to a party, but they didn't go. She did willingly go back to his hotel room with him, and he wanted her to do stuff with him. She didn't want to. She tried to leave. He wouldn't let her. He supposedly held her down on the bed by her throat, left bruises and markings on her neck, and supposedly there was another person in the room watching. And then she was able to get away. He did follow her. He tried to keep her from leaving, but she was able to leave. And the whole defense of this man is the language barrier and the cultural differences. I don't care if you don't speak English. I don't care if you have a different culture than here. You understand the word no. That's universal. Everybody knows what no means. You cannot blame that on a language barrier or a difference in cultures. And if their difference in cultures is so drastic from ours that they think that behavior like that is okay because it's allowed in their country, then they shouldn't be here. Because now we're putting our citizens at risk for people who do not follow the rules here and the laws here. Just because you can do stuff like that in your country and get away with it doesn't mean you can do it here. And if you think you can, then you need to send them back home. Period. Stop bringing them here. And we have so many coming in, and it's ridiculous. You know, I won't say it. Never mind. Forget it. I'm not going to bring it up, but it's ridiculous. And, a lot of people say, well, she went back to the hotel with him. She decided to go be with him and hang out with him. So what? Lots of people go hang out with people. Doesn't mean that they want anything like that to happen. And when they say no, even if they start to engage and change their mind and say no, the answer is no. And that means you stop. This retroactive stuff of they willingly did something and then they regret it later. So now they decide to say that they were assaulted. That's one thing. That's a bunch of crazy crap. But clearly, this girl is saying that she said no from the beginning. And the marks on her body would tell the story that this was forced on her. Okay, let's talk about Biden building a security fence around his beach home. The DHS is building it. It's a $455,000 or more security fence. This is by Ryan Severda of the Daily Wire. The Department of Homeland Security is building a nearly $500,000 security fence around Biden's beach home in Delaware. The move comes after the admin halted construction of the border wall on the U.S. Mexico border and has canceled contracts related to the wall's construction, which comes as the administration's policies have been blamed for causing a historic flood of illegal immigration into the U.S. through the southern border. The New York Post reported in September, the department awarded a contract of $456,548 to Turnstone Holdings for purchase and installation of security fencing at 32 Fairview, Rehoboth, Delaware. According to USA Spending.gov, an online database tracking federal government spending. The contract started September 21st and is expected to end December 31st. Construction of the fence is expected to end by that date. The DHS is listed as the main awarding and funding office of the contract, while the U.S. Secret Service is listed as the sub-agency. Additional information and details about the fence have not been publicly released. So, our tax dollars are paying to secure Biden's beach home, but our tax dollars cannot be used to secure our border. This is how crazy these people are. That they think that only they matter, only their protection is crucial to doing stuff like this. But everybody else, you're free game. You don't need security or protection because we don't care about you. Because they don't. They really don't care about us. Biden's border crisis reached a new level on Friday as data released by U.S. Customs and Border Protection showed that the Border Patrol has made approximately 1.66 million arrests of illegal aliens entering the U.S. from Mexico for fiscal year 2021. Um, Border crossings surpassed 1.6 million annually, at least twice recently, in 1986 and in 2000, the Wall Street Journal reported. In 2019, when crossings reached a peak under the Trump administration, the Border Patrol made about 850,000 arrests. CBP said that it recorded 192,001 encounters along the southern border for the month of September, a slight decrease from the previous month. Chad Wolf, former acting DHS secretary and Heritage visiting fellow, slammed Biden in a statement over the latest numbers, calling his policies a failure. Quote, instead of upholding the rule of law, the admin has chosen to open the border by eliminating effective, humane border security policies that were working, replace those policies with no alternative, and then process the subsequent historic flows of illegal aliens into the U.S. as quickly as possible. And make no mistake, contrary to the Biden admin spin, the vast majority of those apprehended at the southern border are being released into our communities, as CBP's own publicly available numbers show. The men and women of CBP deserve so much better than this. They deserve leaders who will help them do their jobs, enforce the rule of law, and give them the tools they need. The Biden admin has done the opposite at every turn, and we're all paying the price for it. Mark Morgan, former acting CBP commissioner and Heritage visiting fellow, warned Americans to not be fooled by the Biden admin's attempts to spin these still sky high numbers as some sort of win. These 192,000 apprehensions are still more than 40,000 higher than the highest monthly total during the 2019 crisis, a crisis that then President Trump quickly and successfully moved to solve. The Biden admin knowingly created a crisis because it sees a political benefit in mass illegal immigration, and thus it has no interest in slowing the historic surge to our border. More importantly, however, official apprehensions dropped slightly while the number of gotaways, those who evade apprehension and enter the country after escaping law enforcement, increased from August. The numbers remain at unsustainable highs, and now more illegal aliens are crossing the border without even being apprehended, as more and more Border Patrol agents are pulled off the line to process migrants through overcrowded CBP facilities and release them into the U.S. This cannot continue. And I do know that Governor Abbott is allowing arrests to be made for people that are illegally crossing the border. I think he started to enlist the National Guard. I think it was back in June or July. So I know arrests are being made in Texas, um, but I don't know what else is going on from that point. But I even covered in an earlier episode that it's not just the mass number of people that are coming over, it's also the importation of fentanyl and how that is getting into the country and it's very dangerous. The couple people who have overdosed accidentally, the the drugs that are laced with fentanyl and people are do not know that that's what's in it. They're making fake pills with the fentanyl, and people think that they're buying some other type of opiate, and they don't realize what they're actually getting, and it's a lethal amount, and they end up overdosing by accident. That was a really sad story, and it's a really, really big problem. So we're not just looking at more people and a burden on our economy, but we're also looking at our citizens being endangered by the drug trade. And that's actually coming from China. That's where the fentanyl is coming from. So China is also involved in that and responsible for that. And speaking of China, I don't believe, um, I'm, well, I do. I'm pretty sure, well, I say that, I mean, I can't prove it, but it's not too far fetched to think that China is behind or at least part of the supply chain crisis and intentionally causing problems to where they can have better footing to negotiate trade deals and benefit more than somebody else might. But I also believe that our own government, that the Biden admin is also intentionally causing problems with the supply chain. So I have two different stories about that. One's a story and one's a survey. But the Washington Post did an op ed that's told people to not whine about the supply chain shortages and the empty shelves. Now, I tweeted about this the other day that um, this chain crisis is affecting my job because the place that we purchase our supplies for the store don't have some of the supplies that we need, some of the hangers that we need, and we're relying on our customers to bring that back to us so that we still have them. And I've called other places where we can order supplies from, and they don't have any either. So it's not just our store and our supply company, it's all of them. I couldn't find them anywhere. So it affects not just people trying to buy stuff, but people that are working. And then people that need those supplies are affected, but people who make those supplies to be sent to the people who need them are affected. So it's just a trickle down effect, and everybody's affected. So this was published to encourage Americans to not rant about the supply chain crisis and other economic troubles. As dozens of cargo ships coming from Asia remain stranded off the coast of California, social media users have been posting images of empty store shelves and expressing frustration that they aren't able to make formerly routine purchases. However, um, is that McLean Maynard, an author and contributing columnist for the Washington Post, told readers to not complain about the phenomenon. This is what she said. Across the country, Americans' expectations of speedy service and easy access to consumer products have been crushed like a styrofoam container in a trash compactor. Time for some new, more realistic expectations. Fast food is less fast. A huge flotilla of container ships is stuck offshore in California, waiting to unload. Shelves normally stocked with Halloween candy this time of year are empty, as I saw the other day at a Target here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. American consumers, their expectations pampered and catered to for decades, are not accustomed to inconvenience. Yeah, we're not accustomed to not being able to buy regular food that you buy all the time at the store. I don't think anybody's worried about Halloween candy. They're worried about the fact that the simplest foods that they normally buy, they're unable to purchase. Meat. I think Elijah Schaefer said he was going to buy like a 3 pack of steaks at Costco, and it was like $82 for 3 steaks. That's ridiculous. And I don't know if that price going up is pure inflation or if it's a mixture of inflation and meat shortages because of the supply chain, or if it's all intentional and they're driving up the price to make it to where people can't buy meat because we do know that they want to make it a luxury item instead of something you eat every day. So it could be one of the three, it could be all three, a mixture of any of those, but it's ridiculous. So she again slammed consumers for their willingness to whine about staffing shortages. Customers' persistent whine. Why don't they just hire more people? Sounds feeble in this era of the Great Resignation, especially in industries such as food service with reputations for being tough places to work. Rather than living constantly on the verge of throwing a fit and risking it out and risking taking it out and overwhelmed servers, struggling shop owners, or late arriving delivery people, we do ourselves a favor by consciously lowering expectations. Okay, bit of advice for this woman. Talking about constantly on the verge of throwing a fit, that is a great definition of people on the left. They are constantly on the verge of throwing a fit for anything that they see, hear, somebody writes, anything that they can be offended by, which is anything and everything, and they throw a fit. And then they throw it on social media to garner attention because they are severely lacking attention and they're so desperate to get it that they'll take negative attention on top of that. Um, but it's like, practice what you preach type of thing. I don't need some leftist, liberal, probably upper class white woman telling me not to be upset that we can't get certain things at the store. This isn't about convenience or being pampered or spoiled. This is about our government not taking the steps it needs to first ensure that this didn't happen in the first place. And second, since it did happen, doing all they can to remedy the problem rather than Jen Psaki making light of the issue, which is what she did. And, you know, the reporter probably shouldn't have talked about people not getting their treadmills. Maybe he should have mentioned food and things like that that are more important than a treadmill, but that's beside the point. You also got to remember that they shut down gyms, and people that are very health conscious and want to stay healthy, maybe they bought a treadmill so that they could actually work out because they can't go to their gyms. So it's just, I don't know, sometimes you want to high five these people in the face because they're so either out of touch with reality or they're just that ignorant. But I have a hard time believing they're that ignorant. I feel like they're smarter than some people will give them credit for, and they're hoping that we're dumb enough to fall for what they say. They seem to think Republicans are these dumb redneck hicks just because we don't have, a college degree in, gender studies, that we're somehow less than. And I would say that people that didn't go to college are probably more educated than the ones who did because we actually know how to do stuff. Sure, you can talk about gender studies and dance theory, and you may know a lot about that, but what can you actually do with that? Nothing. So you're helpless. And this is why you get on social media and whine and complain because you have no purpose. Anyway, referring to food rationing in the 40s and gasoline shortages in the 70s, she told spoiled American consumers that they should make adjustments while waiting for the supply chain crisis to abate. In response to the supply chain woes, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who has been on paid paternity leave for months, recently emphasized that the phenomenon is a sign of economic growth. This is what he says. Well, certainly a lot of the challenges that we have been experiencing this year will continue into next year, but there are both short term and long term steps that we can take to do something about it. Look, part of what's happening isn't just the supply side, it's the demand side. Demand is off the charts. Retail sales are through the roof. And if you think about those images of ships, for example, waiting at anchor on the West Coast, every one of those ships is full of record amounts of goods that Americans are buying because demand is up, because income is up, because the president has successfully guided this economy out of the teeth of a terrifying recession. Now the issue is, even though our ports are handling more than they ever have, record amounts of goods coming through, our supply chains can't keep up. And of course, our supply chains, that's a complicated system that is mostly in private hands, and rightly so. Yeah, that's not the problem. Well, yeah, there's such a high demand because people haven't been able to get anything. Duh. And I don't understand why none of these cargo ships are taking Ron DeSantis up on his offer to come to Florida so that they can get their stuff off their ships and get it to the people. And there's more than just Florida that has places you can do that. Texas is along the coast, Louisiana, all those states that are along the coast may have places where you can go drop off all of this cargo. And I don't understand why they're not doing it unless they're also part of the problem of trying to deprive people of the goods that they need, which will inevitably crash the economy and allow the government to reset it with the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. You can't tell me that this isn't a part of that. I don't believe that it's not. This is to be able to reset the economy in the vision that they want to do it in. And they're doing a pretty good job at it because nobody is working hard enough to make the changes necessary to get these people out of power. They're just not doing it. We put people in office that we trusted to do the job and get things done and take care of what the country needs, and they never do it. A handful of people in Congress and in the Senate are not going to be able to do the job alone. They're surrounded by a bunch of people that only care about making money. And, 7 to 10 people can't do it alone. It can't be done. So we need to vote these people out and start from scratch. And I think a lot of people wonder, yeah, but what are we trying to conserve? What is it? I don't think there is much that we can conserve from our society today other than our Constitution, and that's about it. And then everything else just needs to be torn down and built back from the ground up. Put new people in place, put in term limits. Don't allow them to make more money being in Congress than they do working a regular job. That should be done away with completely. They should not be able to go in there lower middle class citizens and come out millionaires. No insider trading, none of these things, no giving yourself a raise, nothing. You go in for 2 years and then you get out. Maybe two terms of 2 years, just like um, not like a president, but you get a total of 4 years, two terms of 2 years, and then you're done. Then you go get a real job. You don't get money continuously for serving in as a public figure. Stop giving former presidents a salary after they're no longer the president. This is a lot of the reason why we continue to be indebted is because we're paying people who are no longer serving in office, who are doing nothing but just sitting there and living off of all this money that they're not earning. Why are we giving former presidents salaries like this? Why? They don't deserve it. They don't deserve it. Especially if they did nothing good for the country to begin with. They don't, even if they did great things, they don't deserve it. Let's talk about Twitter for a minute. The CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, or hipster Rasputin, he has issued a dire warning about economy as inflation soars under Biden. So let's see what he has to say. Maybe he has some insight. Who knows? So, Jack Dorsey warned late on Friday that hyperinflation would change life as people know it. It's happening now, and it's going to hit the U.S. He said, hyperinflation is going to change everything. It's happening. It's happening. He later added, it will happen in the U.S. soon, and so the world. Hyperinflation is a term to describe rapid, excessive, and out of control general price increases in an economy, Investopedia explained. While inflation is a measure of the pace of rising prices for goods and services, hyperinflation is rapidly rising inflation, typically measuring more than 50% per month. So CNBC reported this. The tweet comes with consumer price inflation running near a 30-year high in the U.S. and growing concern that the problem could be worse than policymakers have anticipated. On Friday, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell acknowledged that inflation pressures are likely to last longer than previously expected, noting that they could run well into next year. The central bank leader added that he expects the Fed soon to begin pulling back on the extraordinary measures it has provided to help the economy that critics say have stoked the inflation run. A report from Bloomberg News last month said that one of the top concerns that clients of UBS Group AG have is whether central banks' massive stimulus could trigger hyperinflation. Former McDonald's USA CEO Ed Rensi told Fox Business this week that Democrat President Joe Biden's policies were dramatically impacting the supply chain crisis and inflation. I first experienced this back during the 70s up into the 80s when we had stagflation, where prices of fuel were going up like crazy, he said. Transportation was limited, distribution was limited, we had to raise prices. We had to address our opening and closing schedules in restaurants modified to menus, and we're going through it again. It's been exacerbated clearly by COVID, but it's also been impacted dramatically by the policy changes that President Biden made even before he was inaugurated. When he said he's going to shut down oil, shut down the pipelines, move away from fossil fuel. Biden's approval rating has plummeted in recent months as inflation has continued to skyrocket under his watch. Larry Summers, who served as Treasury Secretary under former President Bill Clinton and Director of the National Economic Council under former President Barack Obama, warned this month that inflation is worse than expected. Well, I think we now have a gathering storm of inflation, and we're likely to see some combination of that storm coming to fruition, or the central bank being forced to act to contain inflation with potentially serious financial consequences, or some combination of those two things. We've had labor market inflation wages at a 7.5% rate in the last month. We've had consumer price inflation close to a 6% rate over the last 6 months. We've had houses causing price inflation at over 20% over the last year, and almost none of that has yet been reflected in the price. Um, what is that? In the price indices? What? I don't know what that is. I think there are very serious reasons for concern. I mean, I'm going to admit, I don't know anything about inflation. I know what it is, but I don't know much about all the policies and the stuff for that. So if I don't know something, that's because I just don't know much about it. Well, now I feel stupid because in indices, like an indication, plural for the word indication, kind of. Okay, so if we look at this survey, we do know that economists foresee high inflation and supply chain crisis and labor shortages lasting well into 2022. So this is the Wall Street Journal polled economists on high inflation. And it says that economists slashed growth forecasts this year to an average 3.1% annualized in the third quarter from 7% in the July survey. They also lowered projected fourth quarter growth to 4.8% from 5.4%. Consumer spending, and by extension GDP growth, is being limited by high rates of inflation, eroding the real purchasing power of consumers. Visa economist Michael Brown told the outlet. Indeed, economists also hiked their inflation forecasts. Consumer price inflation will drop to 3.4% by June of next year, then 2.6% by the end of 2022, according to respondents' average estimates. That is still above the average 1.8% that prevailed in the decade before the pandemic. Most respondents, however, pointed to the supply chain crisis and labor shortages as the primary factors limiting growth. Concerns about limited supply are the main cloud over the outlook. Around half of respondents cited supply chain bottlenecks as the biggest threat to growth in the next 12 to 18 months, while nearly one-fifth pointed to labor shortages. They also expect supply chain woes to weigh on the economy through much of next year. Some 45% estimate that it will take until the second half of 2022 for bottlenecks to have mostly receded, compared with two-fifths expecting major improvement before then. Beyond the survey, other economists worry that the combined effect of the calamities is sending the U.S. back into a recession. Earlier this month, David Blanchflower of Dartmouth College and Alex Bryson of University College London released a paper entitled The Economics of Walking About and Predicting U.S. Downturns. Recalling analysts' failure to predict the 2008 recession, the professors argued that the wisdom of crowds held by non-expert consumers is a reliable predictor of recessions. Rapid downturns in major consumer sentiment surveys, especially those from the Conference Board and the University of Michigan, have successfully forecasted recessions for the past 4 decades. Blanchflower and Bryson note that such metrics have seen double-digit declines in the last 6 months, suggesting that the U.S. economy may now be retracting. So there you have it, going well on into next year, of course. Okay, I'm done talking about all that. It's very um, it's stressful. But let's talk about Alec Baldwin and what happened there. So, some people were saying that the prop gun for, obviously it's not a prop gun, it's a real gun, and that there was a paper wad that holds in the gunpowder. That is what came out. Um, but I've also seen where they said it was actually a live round in the gun. It was not a blank, it was a real bullet. I don't know which one it is because obviously it's still under investigation. But they want to know. So a legal expert gave his opinion, and he discusses potential prison time. Um, but was it an accident, negligence, recklessness, involuntary manslaughter? So Elijah and Sydney were talking about this, and I even before they started bringing this up, I started thinking this myself. Now, Alec Baldwin is a huge advocate for gun laws and restricting people's rights to own guns. Yet he makes movies where, gun violence prevails in the movies he makes. But one could think that if someone actually knew about guns and knew how to handle guns and maybe had some training and education with guns, that maybe before using the gun in a scene for a movie, that if you had the education and training that you might need, you would have thought to check to make sure that the gun wasn't loaded before you actually used it. That makes a lot of sense to me. Now you're saying, well, that's the prop division's job to make sure that everything's ready to go. Okay, sure, it's their job to make sure things are properly set up. But wouldn't you, as the person who's going to be handling it, want to double check and make sure that they didn't miss something? I feel like this was definitely negligence. In no way do I think that he purposefully put a bullet in the gun and killed this person and injured another. I do not think that that is what happened, but I do think it was negligence. And I think that, you know, as anybody else, if it wasn't a Hollywood elite, would be charged with involuntary manslaughter or what is it, criminal negligence, that he should receive the same treatment. And maybe, like Elijah said, we should start looking into anybody who is going to be acting in a movie that is going to be using a gun, shooting blanks, that they need proper training and education of firearms before being allowed to do so. That would make a whole lot of sense to me, and maybe this kind of thing wouldn't happen. And the only other time I know of this happening was with Brandon Lee on the set of The Crow, and that was from 20 feet away, and he was shot in the stomach. And there were conflicting stories because the prop department said it was a metal projectile that accidentally was lodged in the barrel of the gun, but then the autopsy report showed that a live round was actually removed from his stomach. So, and this is where we're at here. You have conflicting stories where it was, this is what happened, but then you're also hearing that it was a live round. So, let's just see what the Daily Wire has to say about it. Done moving for a minute? So, attorney Andrew Branca of Law of Self Defense weighed in Friday on the Alec Baldwin on-set shooting incident that left one dead, cinematographer Helena Hutchins, and another injured, director Joel Souza. Branca, who notably offered insight into the Derek Chauvin case last year, ran through legal possibilities Baldwin might be faced with over the fatal shooting, stressing that he's operating on hypotheticals based on news reports and court documents, not on what actually happened, as that still remains unverified. He also discussed potential liability for Baldwin, who is reportedly a co producer for the movie Rust. The fatal shooting could be argued to be an accident, prove negligence, or be classified as recklessness or involuntary manslaughter, a worst case scenario for the actor, Branca said in an 18-minute video. The attorney noted that for this case, involuntary manslaughter in New Mexico would be classified as a fourth-degree felony, which is typically punishable by up to 18 months in prison and a fine of $5,000. Here is Branca's commentary concerning the argument that the shooting was an accident per law of self-defense. What might a genuine accident with a handgun look like? Well, imagine a gun that has an unseen defect, such that when the barrel is brought up to the horizontal position, the gun discharges without any press of the trigger. This is clearly not how a gun is supposed to fire, nor would any reasonable person expect a gun to fire under such circumstances. If the gun being handled by Alec Baldwin is found to have such a defect, and his handling of the gun was otherwise non-negligent, he would have a good argument that the gun discharging and killing Miss Hutchins was a genuine accident for which he should bear no civil or criminal liability. So for negligence, um, In our hypothetical with the defective gun, for example, it may be true that the discharge of the gun was not foreseeable by Alec Baldwin and therefore not really in his control, but the direction in which the gun was pointed certainly was in his control. The death of Miss Hutchins by the discharge of the gun could not have occurred had the gun not been pointed at her, and that pointing of the gun at her would certainly seem to constitute negligence. Anyone trained in firearms safety and anyone handling an inherently dangerous instrument like a firearm can be reasonably expected to have a duty to be trained on its safe operation around others, would know that one of the four primary safety rules of handling firearms is that you do not point the muzzle of the gun at anything you are not willing to destroy. Pointing the gun at Miss Hutchins, then, at least under circumstances in which the gun discharges and kills her, would certainly qualify as negligence at a minimum, and thus create civil liability for her death. Branca then took on criminal recklessness and involuntary manslaughter, again making it clear that he was operating on hypotheticals based on news reports and does not know what actually happened. Based on reporting that Baldwin allegedly joked that he should shoot Hutchins and Sousa if he had to shoot the scene again, and then pulled the trigger, then would be no innocent accident, and we have no mere civil negligence. Instead, we have, with the pointing of the weapon at the victims and the deliberate press of the trigger, criminal recklessness. So apparently he joked that he would shoot them if he had to shoot the scene again. Well, I'm not saying that that's what he did. I'm just saying that's a little bit sus that you would joke about that and then she ends up dying because you shot her with the gun, even if you didn't mean to actually kill her. When you are aware you are creating a risk of death, deliberately disregard that risk and death results. That's the very definition of criminal recklessness, commonly referred to as involuntary manslaughter. Notably, Reuters reported Friday that the news outlet found no evidence any publication reported Baldwin saying, "Another take? How about I just effing shoot the both of you" on set. The attorney then noted of Baldwin's reported role as actor and co-producer, noting that this could have implications for Baldwin within the civil law context and criminal law context. Alec Baldwin is both the actor handling the firearm when it discharged, and an actor might argue that he is at the bottom of the safety responsibility ladder for something like a movie set. But he was also a co producer for the film, which would place him at the top of the safety responsibility ladder. In theory, an actor at the bottom and the producer at the top might each point the finger at each other in case of a tragic event like this. That is, the actor might argue that the producer ought to have had better safety protocols in place, and the producer might argue that the actor had the ultimate responsibility for safe handling of the firearm. In this case, however, Alec Baldwin occupies both seats, so he can point his finger in this manner if he wishes, but ultimately he'll be pointing it at himself. And this implication could well apply not merely in the civil law context within the scope of negligence, but also within the criminal law context within the scope of recklessness and involuntary manslaughter. But I will say this: I don't foresee him serving any time in prison. I see him getting off scot free, and because this is what typically happens with people in the Hollywood, people on the left, they get away with everything and they're never punished. And sure, you could say, well, just the thought that he killed someone without meaning to is, a pretty big punishment, maybe mentally. But you need to be held responsible because then you things like that can happen again. Or if you're held responsible for the mistakes that you make, then maybe it can prevent someone else from accidentally doing the same thing later on. He really should be held accountable for what happened. He was ultimately responsible for making sure that he was being safe while holding a gun while filming a movie scene. Just because you're filming a scene in a movie doesn't mean that you can be laxed about the safety guidelines of how to handle a firearm. It's still a gun. It's still dangerous. Just because you're not really shooting somebody and you're playing pretend, that's still a real gun, and it still has real life consequences if it accidentally shoots somebody. I'm just saying. He should be held responsible for that. So the director, he issued a statement on about the shooting, and he said, "I'm gutted by the loss of my friend and colleague Helena. She was kind, vibrant, incredibly talented, fought for every inch, and always pushed me to be better. My thoughts are with her family at this most difficult time. I am humbled and grateful by the outpouring of affection we have received from our filmmaking community, the people of Santa Fe, and the hundreds of strangers who have reached out. It will surely aid in my recovery. So, the Santa Fe Sheriff's Department released a statement shortly after the incident indicating that an investigation was underway and detailing what happened to Hutchins and Souza following the accident. So, they confirmed that two individuals were shot on the set of Rust. Helena Hutchins, who was 42, and Joel Souza, 48. Miss Hutchins was transported via helicopter to University of New Mexico Hospital, where she was pronounced dead by medical personnel. Mr. Souza was transported by ambulance to Christus St. Vincent Regional Medical Center, where he is undergoing treatment for his injuries. Um, the Daily Wire's Ash Show reported on Saturday that an assistant director allegedly yelled out "cold gun" before giving Baldwin the firearm that would eventually discharge and kill Hutchins, according to CNN's reporting on court documents. On Friday, news broke that crew on the set of Rust had previously complained about working conditions, having to drive from Albuquerque to the set near Santa Fe on a daily basis, despite having been allegedly promised accommodation nearby. Additionally, the Los Angeles Times reported on Friday that according to alleged witnesses, there had been safety issues on set, as well as concerns over multiple accidental discharges prior to the fatal shooting. They said at least one of the camera operators complained last weekend to a production manager about gun safety on the set. In a Friday statement, Baldwin said, "There are no words to convey my shock and sadness regarding the tragic accident that took the life of Helena Hutchins, a wife, mother, and deeply admired colleague of ours. I'm fully cooperating with the police investigation to address how this tragedy occurred, and I am in touch with her husband, offering my support to him and his family. My heart is broken for her husband, their son, and all who knew and loved Helena." Okay, so we have reports that there were issues with gun safety on the set, that the gun already um, accidentally discharged multiple times prior to this time. So they already knew that there were issues and they were never addressed. And as a co producer, he should have been addressing this and saying, "This isn't going to work. We need to get another gun. This one is discharging accidentally, and this will really cause a problem if it happens again. Let's just be safe and let's get another gun and make sure it's working properly, or at least see what's wrong with this one and fix it if we can." It doesn't seem like any of that was addressed, as if it was just no big deal and let's just continue on. Maybe he has a deadline he wants to meet. I don't know. I'm telling you, he should fully be held responsible, if not for criminal negligence, then involuntary manslaughter. Either fits, honestly. Okay, it's enough about Alec Baldwin. I don't like Hollywood. So the last thing I wanted to do is I said I wanted to read an article that Candace Owens wrote because I really like her writing. And this one is just an opinion piece, and it's called "Welcome to World War III." My husband has a lot of family members who live in Australia. They're wonderful people. Despite the fact that we don't always share the same politics, they are the kind of old school folks who don't let politics get in the way of meaningful relationships. Recently, he received a message from one of these family members. She was expressing how the mental state of everyone around her is in steep decline. She shared with him a message that she'd received from a friend of hers, a woman who lives in Queensland, and it's genuinely shocking. It is a list of the COVID rules that she says Australian citizens are being made to follow. As you read this list, I want you to do your best to imagine your life and your mental state if you were being made to abide by these rules. A limited number of people allowed in your house. At various times, we are told we are allowed no visitors. Funerals limited to between 5 and 10 people. Curfews. Helicopters often patrol the skies to ensure that everyone is abiding. Not allowed to go past 5 kilometers from your home. Not allowed to sit down at many parks, beaches, and public spaces. No dancing. Only one person per household is allowed to go shopping for essentials. Only essential shopping is allowed, and at times the Defense Force and police have checked what people are shopping for. International borders are closed. No one is allowed to leave the country. Small businesses are shut down, while big businesses are allowed to operate. Citizens are locked out of their home state. Thousands of them are not allowed to return unless they get a vaccine or go through a slow and restrictive exemption request process. Families have been refused access to attend funerals that are across state borders. Yes, there is an application process, and you have to apply to attend funerals and weddings, and many people are denied. Relatedly, many people have died without family beside them because there is a mandatory quarantine process to move, and many people didn't make it in time. One woman was only given access to her dying father in a hazmat suit. Protests have been declared illegal, despite the fact that protest is supposedly a constitutional right. If you protest, heavily armed police can pepper spray, tear gas, or fire rubber bullets at you. For the last 20 years, the U.S. has spent trillions of dollars in Afghanistan fighting a war, which we lost, by the way. But we were told the war was necessary, that the slaughtering of American sons and daughters on foreign soil was necessary because we were fighting for a noble cause to spread democracy in a tyrannical land, to free an oppressed people. Let's take that strategy to an absurd extreme for just a moment. If we're so opposed to tyranny, when do we deploy troops to Australia? When do we invade Australia to free oppressed people who are suffering under a totalitarian regime? When do we spend trillions of dollars to spread democracy in Australia? Australia is a tyrannical police state. Its citizens are quite literally imprisoned against their will. So when do we deploy? When do the leaders who want to counter tyranny across the globe commit to countering this tyranny? I ask that in jest, of course. But what is happening in Australia under the guise of a virus which, as of August 7th, 2021, experts estimate overall recovery rate is between 97 and 99.75%, is in fact federal overreach, tyranny, and totalitarianism, the kind that gives birth to evil dictatorships and human rights atrocities. We all know the truth that what is happening in Australia was meant to happen here in America, that this current totalitarian administration is fighting tooth and nail to trample state rights and federalize America. If it weren't for Republican governors standing in the way, we'd be similarly stripped of our most basic individual freedoms. Can anyone explain to me, by the way, in simple sentences, why the Australian government is any better or any nobler than the Taliban? Both groups believe they have a right to oppress and imprison people for their own good. Our are Western governments any better? I could say honestly that I never thought I'd live to see a world war, but here we are. We are in the midst of an ideological and psychological global war. It is a war being waged by governments all over the world, from here to Australia, against the very citizens they govern. To that end, I say, welcome to World War III. Yeah, I would definitely say that we are in another world war. Now it's a cold war. Obviously, we're not there's no weapons being fired. This is all being done through psychological warfare, breaking people down mentally and brainwashing them, indoctrinating them. And this is how it's done. You find something that can divide your country, and then you feed the flames of that division until everyone is at each other's throats and you step in and take over while everyone else is distracted with what you distracted them with. And we see that happening all over. And the only reason that hasn't happened here in America is because the populace is armed. We have our guns and we can stop them anytime, and they know better than to push that far when we have guns to protect ourselves, which was specifically given to us not to protect us from other people, but to protect us from an overreaching tyrannical government. It's exactly why we were given that right in our Constitution. Anyway, I'm going to leave that here for today. I think we covered a lot. I won't be back until Wednesday. I'm not going to have time to make extra episodes this week. That's okay. But don't forget, you can go to my link tree, get all my social media, and go to Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Pandora. Subscribe to the podcast, leave me a review, and please, now that I'm back on YouTube, great, I can start doing it again. Go to my channel, like and share this video with people that well, just everybody. Share with everybody. Subscribe to the channel. That would really help me out a lot. Hit the notification bell so you know when I upload new videos. And hopefully, I don't get another video taken down because I really can't afford to lose my channel. And I know it's not that big, but I don't want to lose it. So hopefully nothing in here that I said will cause for that to happen. I hope not. Anyway, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you back here on Wednesday. God bless.